Hey, g'day and welcome to the shop. I'm going to be starting on a new project today. It's going to be a wood project. I want to build one of these universal knife blocks. This container is actually packed with bamboo skewers, and the idea is that you put enough of these in there that when you push the knife in, it makes its own slot, and if you buy more knives, if you want to rearrange them, it's not a problem. So the project is based around some material that I have that has a natural edge, and the idea is that I'm going to cut 4 pieces, 2 for the front, 2 for the back, and they'll be assembled into a pair of sides. Probably going to use dowel joints to assemble this. I'm going to do a little bit of decorative work on the front here. This is going to be a little laser cut and engraved decoration to go on the front. So the next step, we're going to look at the material that I have. We'll get it all milled up and we'll take from there. So this is the material. I bought this off a gentleman who slabbed this with a chainsaw mill. He wasn't terribly precise about the species. I'm thinking it's probably Swamp Mahogany. You can probably see here that it does have a natural edge. This is just taken straight through the heart of the tree. And you can see all the resin pockets and the piping in the center of the tree here. I'm going to be able to avoid that by working off this surface here, but it's also been through a fire, so that this is all charred on the outside, and that's actually what I want. I'm going to wire brush that and try and make that a feature of the material. Okay, here I am about an hour and a half later. So what I did was I took off this side of that slab that we looked at earlier. I've resawed that down the center using a bandsaw, and that's now essentially 2 book matched panels, 12 millimeters thick, and that's now ready for cutting up into the various pieces I'll need for making the knife block. This edge, I've wire brushed that just to get rid of the loose carbon that was on the outside. I'm going to give that a pretty hefty sort of wire brushing. There's still loose pieces that are coming off, so I don't want that to happen. But interestingly, it's the heat from the fire has obviously affected the grain on the outside of that flitch there. But I like that. That's going to give it a bit of character. Seriously, this stuff's really hard. Try again. Okay. Okay, well, I just fitted a much coarser belt, or a 60 grit. This stuff's just so hard, the other belt wasn't even touching it. Try again with this one. Okay, that's better. Okay, well that's all the stock cut out for the box itself. So what I've got so far is the two vertical sides, the front and back pieces with their natural edges. And typically what usually happens is you go to a lot of trouble to mark something out and don't bother to check both sides. So I had a look on the back of this piece and there's a chainsaw mark in it, so that's scrap. Luckily I had another piece which I can substitute, so that'll be fine. So the next step is to trim these exactly to length. You would have seen that I was too lazy to buy a slide miter saw, and it just didn't have enough width to cut these, so I'll trim these up. I left them a little bit oversized, so I'll trim them exactly to length, and that's important because they're going to butt up against these two vertical sides. I haven't cut the base yet. I'm going to leave that until I've got the carcass of the top done, and then I can measure accurately and get the overhang all the way around for the beveled edge. Okay, so I've basically laid this out on the bench now, and it's sort of flattened as if you just unpeeled the whole thing and laid it down flat. And I've gone through and checked all of these surfaces, and I've rearranged things a little bit. I tried to put all the best surfaces on the outside. Any defects I found, I've arranged those to be on the inside. So what I want to do now is work out where we're going to put the dowels. And okay, so the dowels that I'm using are 6mm fluted dowel, and I've already worked out that the depth I need to drill to in these end grain parts is 25mm. That's going to leave over just enough material to get into the thickness of the front and back, and I don't have a lot of room to play with there, so I'm going to be very careful drilling those holes. This hardwood is really difficult to drill. It gums up the flutes in the drill. that's all the doweling done on the front and back pieces. So the next step is to transfer the dowel marks onto the inside face where I'm going to drill the matching holes. Or the other option, you can use a marking knife. So that's got them on the edge, and now they've got to come across the face. Okay, now to drill the hole, I want to bring that in 8mm from this edge, and that's going to give me a 2mm offset. So it's going to look a bit like that, just that little bit of a 2mm offset there. I believe that's called a quirk, Q-U-I-R-K. Almost never hear that term being used anymore. Essentially though, it's just a device to hide your mistakes basically. If I was to make that flat absolutely flush and I didn't get my dowel holes precise enough, then you would see a little bit of offset, a little bit of misalignment, and it becomes really obvious. But if you have the 2mm offset or the quirk and you're not quite right, it's a little bit harder to spot. It also means that I can just round that inside edge just very slightly, break the edge. If I didn't do that, I had it flush, where the opening is, I'd have this razor sharp edge and it'd just be a little bit hard to finish. So I want to get my marking gauge and offset that at 8mm. I could just set up a fence on the drilling machine and it would do the same job. But I'm just going to be a little bit pedantic and mark it out with the gauge. This also gives me a starting point for the drill bit. Okay, so there's my drill positions now on the inside. This is just an old scraper that I made out of a handsaw. I just went and bought a junk saw from a second-hand shop and sliced it up on a guillotine. These things are great when you're working with difficult grain. I wouldn't even try to plane this face here. I'll get tear out and chipping and just make a mess of it. So the scraper is very good for finishing those surfaces that you would normally find very difficult to do. It does take off a good depth of shaving if you've got it sharpened properly. It's really good for removing glue and pencil marks, and it's not too aggressive. It's pretty hard to get it wrong. I just scraped all these, and I had to go at sanding one by hand. I figured that given that they're very small pieces, I might as well just do it that way. The orbital sander tends to just skid them all over the bench, and it probably just gives an old man a bit of a workout, I suppose. So the most important thing when you're doing this is make sure you pay attention to the corners and the ends. They're the bits that tend to get overlooked. You might be wondering why I'm doing both faces of these pieces and not the side pieces. The problem is that once this is assembled, because of that offset, that quirk, you can't sand all of that outside face, so it's got to be done before assembly. Before I do the assembly now, I'm going to put a round on this edge here. Once again, when this is assembled, I won't be able to get at that edge later, so it has to be done now. So I'm going to use a smoothing plane, follow it up with a sanding block. I don't have a router bit that'll do around that small, it's only 2mm. Just got to be a little bit careful here that you're looking at the grain direction. Grain is rising towards this corner, so it's safe to plane from the right hand corner to the left hand corner. The last thing you want to do at this point is get a big tear out in the grain. So I'm going to start with a 45-degree cut. Okay, so that chamfer there is about 2mm wide. I'm going to bring the plane to about 30 degrees. Just give it one shaving, then take it to 60 degrees and just do one shaving. That'll give you 3 chamfers plus the flat on top and the vertical surface there. And then it's just a matter of blending those. That's good. So it's just got that nice little radius on that edge there now. And even though that's hand cut, no one's going to measure it. I might try and do this in close up just so you can see a bit better what's going on. First cut planes at 45 degrees to both faces. Okay, it's about 2mm wide, maybe a bit more. Okay, then tilt it to 30 degrees, just do one cut. Tilt to 60, just do one cut, and then blend it. And there's your radius. And you can use the same technique when you're sanding any surface on a sanding disc. If you want to get it round, you start off by doing it as a series of flats and then blend it right at the end. It's a lot easier to control. So I identified where I want that drill hole to be, and that was just a rough mark. I'm actually setting it out with a pair of dividers and just want that to be the same distance from the two edges there. And just to give it the best chance of starting in the right spot, I'm just going to put a little punch mark in there. And just incidentally, if you're wondering why this drilling machine makes such a weird startup, it's actually fitted with a 3-phase motor and a variable frequency drive. This is an old Tulex, or at least that was the brand that it was on it. It was made in Taiwan, and back in the 1970s. I actually made a new name plate for it. The old one was all beaten up. And the interesting thing is that all of these old drill presses, if you've got one this same pattern or similar to it, they've got a great big cavity up inside them. And if I just get down underneath here, you can see that there's a 12-volt LED downlight fitted into that cavity. And inside there's enough room to fit a transformer, and I've got this wired up to a switch on the front panel, so I can turn the light on and off, and I've got my variable frequency settings on the front there. Okay, so this is the design that I want to laser cut and laser etch to fit into the front of the knife block. I did my best to translate the word knife block into Japanese kanji script, so my apologies to anybody out there who can read kanji. I believe that this symbol means knife, but it can also mean sword or katana, and this symbol I believe means block, but it can also mean blockhead, so it could actually mean some idiot running around with a sword, I'm not sure. Anyway, it looks vaguely Japanese, and the knife block is actually for some Japanese knives, so I thought it was appropriate. So this is a vector file, and I've exported that to my laser cutting software. The timber that I want to use is this material here. This is Huon Pine, and I got this from Strawn in Tasmania, which is sort of like the mecca these days if you want to buy this stuff. It's incredibly difficult to get, and especially in large pieces. This was a piece about the size of a paperback book that I've just trimmed up into a strip. It has this beautifully dense grain, and it's highly impervious to moisture, so it's used almost exclusively for boat building, or high quality boat building. It contains a large amount of resin, like a waxy sort of preservative in the timber itself, and these trees have been found in Tasmania, and they believe they can be up to 4,000 years old. They've actually, some of them have been dead for 2,000 years, and they pulled them out of creek banks and river banks, and they're still completely clean timber and quite usable. So this is what I'm going to use. So we'll give it a whirl, see what happens. So in setting this up, I sort of did the Goldilocks technique. This first one that I did, which was too small, just fell out. The second one was just too big, it's not going in at all. And the third one, by the time I just cleaned up the outside and sanded that, it was just right. So that's the dimension that I ended up going with. It's about 22.8, and I just hand sanded that one, put a bit of a radius on it, but I'd rather do it a little bit more accurately. So what I'm going to do is I've got a piece of dowel, and I'm going to hot glue the disc to the end of that, get it centered as best I can, and then just clean it up on the lathe. I'm going to just put a blob of hot glue on here. Now almost always when you go to put this together, you're a bit slow. What I found is you can get a flame and just heat the hot glue up, just warm it up and get the part on there, and that just gives you a bit of extra time. It's better if the two parts are the same temperature, and you could put the little disc of wood in the oven or use a hot air gun if you really want to get that super accurate. I've got this set up on my metal lathe, but you can do this on a wood lathe if you've got a scroll chuck, it's not a problem. So I'm just going to use a sanding block just to take the dark edge off where the laser has burnt the material, and I'm just going to put a slight radius on this corner here. plan now is to fit the base with these 4 nickel-plated slot head screws. They look nice and retro, and it's just going to make it easier. I don't want to be gluing this part together. It doesn't need to be glued. And it also means I can varnish the inside of the box and the base separately.